We're gonna be talking about female anatomy because as much as I like to interchange the rules between both, there are general rules if you want to make them identifiable. How to draw girls. General things to keep in mind. I always say that women and men are like really, really similar in terms of the general anatomy, but there are things that separate the two. In general, when you are drawing women, the hips tend to be equal to or larger than the width of the rib cage. And this comes with puberty. It's a thing that just happens. Biologically, women don't bulk up as easily, but that doesn't mean they can't be muscular. Like if you draw like the very average woman, she will be less muscular than an average man. That's just like baseline sort of thing, right? Men will bulk up a little bit easier because of testosterone. Women just don't bulk up as often. The chest can be drawn as a teardrop. Women have a different chest than men. That's just facts, right? So women's chests can be drawn with teardrops. Some people like to use an upside down heart. That's a little bit more stylized. If you want to go for something a bit more realistic, you can use an upside down. Effeminate traits are identifiable at age 13 plus generally and are properly developed by 16 plus. When you draw kids, 99% of the time they won't have identifiable feminine or masculine traits in their bodies until they hit puberty. So if you draw like an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old with like very female proportions, that's incorrect. I'm just gonna put it out there right now. That's incorrect and that's creepy. I'm just gonna say it. Like within the body. Usually the way that you identify them is with like hair or like fashion or whatnot within kids. So usually puberty kind of ends or we become more adult-like by 16 to 18 years old. It's very, very general, but that's when you can start using more adult traits within them. These are the general things that you want to keep in mind when it comes to drawing women. This last one is more like for both women and men. Let's talk about proportions. Women tend to be approximately 6.5 to 7 heads tall. So adult women are 6.5 to 7 heads tall. You can also say that women's faces can be narrower if you so want them to be. That again is like up to you though. Face shapes are not gender exclusive. In general, women's faces tend to be a bit softer, but that isn't always the case. And then the next can kind of start from here, come down. Usually they end about here, so it's about 1/3 the size of the head. The shoulder width of a woman's body tends to be 1.5 to 2 heads wide. Yep, so if I take the head and flip it kind of on its side, if I do like this magic, flip it directly on its side, and I kind of make it like 1.5-ish wide like that, that tends to be the shoulder width for women. So that's about 1.5 to 2 heads. Right, so adult woman is 6.5 to 7 heads tall, and the shoulder width is 1.5 to 2 heads wide, where the chest can be drawn with a teardrop. Midsection, the direct center of like heads tends to be where your hips are. So 6.5 divided by 2 is 3.25. So that's 3.25. So that's approximately here-ish. So this will be where the torso ends and the top of the hips and the legs will start down here. I may actually need to make this 7 heads tall because this is a little bit too short for the type of head that I drew. So let's make this, let's approximate. So that's 3.5 then. That feels better. Okay. So once we get to this portion, we can start with the chest, or the torso. These right here are called your trapezius. Trapezius, your yes. People just call them traps. It's like it's a muscle between your shoulders and whatnot. For me, with like a simplified version of the body, I tend to draw it as like the ribcage opening. It's like mixed with the trapezoids. So it's like I've mixed the clavicle, which is this little bone. Like if you touch right below your neck right now, you can feel like a little hard, like straight line that goes between your shoulders. That's your clavicle. So I've kind of mixed the clavicle traps and the chest all together to create this like kind of amalgamation of a ribcage form. Really what you would do is you would have like an oval ribcage opening. You would draw the trapezius first and the clavicle in there as well.
If you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education, become a member on Patreon.
But I tend to draw the chest generally as this sort of like trapezoid partial ribcage shape. Up to you how you decide to do that though. Shoulders, for beginners, I tend to remain them as circles. And then again, if you wanted to draw on the chest, you can start with a circle, add with teardrops. The thing with drawing a woman's chest is that you really shouldn't just draw them as circles. When you draw them as just circles, it's not gonna turn out correct. The way that I've seen it described is like if you took a water balloon and like pinned a portion of it and let it hang off the wall. That's the kind of gravity that you want to think of. So if you kind of start up kind of near the clavicle, you bring it down, that tends to be how you can draw a woman's chest. Next portion, you can do the stomach. Stomach, or like the middle of the torso, you can draw it as like a circle. It's the easiest way to do it. You can apply the hourglass shape afterwards, but this kind of gives you a nice, if you so choose to do the hourglass. Not every woman is built with an hourglass. Let me just put that out there. Not every woman is built with an hourglass. Not every man is built with the upside down triangle. And then usually you can have like the belly button kind of around here. With that, you can kind of cut off the bottom of this circle and then start on the pelvis, which you can draw as an underwear shape. Remember, like we mentioned before, the hips tend to be equal or wider than the rib cage. The rib cage at its widest point would be like here. Okay, yeah. So let's just bring that out a little bit wider. Let's do that. The best way that you can draw this, right, is that generally with women, the hips can be drawn like this. And then with men, the hips can be drawn kind of like this. So it's a difference in the angle that you draw the hips, because men tend to be straight up and down. They tend to use a lot more rectangles than women do, who use a lot more curves. I break this rule all the time. I do nothing but break this rule, but it is the general rule that's up there. Torso ends halfway through height. Because remember, when we are drawing bodies, generally we measure the entire body with heads, right? So we use it in reference to the head that is attached to the body. That tends to be why people draw heads first before anything else. Let's move on to the legs then. When we draw legs, I say this all the time, anything in pairs should be drawn in tandem. So if I draw one thigh, which you can kind of draw as this almost trapezoid-y shape, I'm gonna have to draw the other one at the exact same time, because what this does is it allows for you to get the proportions equal to each other. I say to do this when you draw eyes as well. This is how you get better at drawing eyes without having to flip the thing, copy and flip it over. If you draw them in tandem, this helps you do them with the same proportions. So your thighs and your calves are equal in length. You can usually do a little coffin shape for your knees, an elongated hexagon. But let's talk about the calves. Calves are a very, very specific shape. They're a coffin shape, but they're very, very specific. The outer muscle is higher than the inner muscle. So this is your calf. This is the outside, inside. All right, so the outer muscle of your calf is taller than the inside. And usually your thigh is approximately the same length as your calf. So keep that in mind, is that your outer muscle will be taller than the inner one. Here's a fun little thing for you, by the way. Your foot length is equal to your forearm length and your head height. Do something for me. If you're flexible enough, put your foot right up next to your face. If you're not flexible enough, put your foot right up next to your forearm. Notice the exact same length. That's how you know how long your feet should be. Feet can also be drawn really, really simply with 4 shapes. It is a circle, a trapezoid, a triangle, and a semicircle. I don't use this method anymore, but it is a really, really easy way to draw a foot in any angle, because if you stack those shapes differently, then you get the foot in a bunch of different angles. It's really, really nice. So let's just do that on our little doll over here. When we draw in the arms as well, your elbow will generally come around your belly button, so around here-ish. And then your forearms will kind of come down, which is also more of like a coffin shape, but this time both sides are generally equal to one another in height. And then you have your hands where the fingertips end at about halfway to 1/3 to 2/3 down the thigh.
If you learned something new, like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Join a virtual class to learn live from our professional artists. Get creative assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork. Start today and level up your practice. If you enjoyed this video, here's a couple other videos you can check out next.